Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. This time we're tackling sea moss, which seems like it's everywhere these days.
Oh yeah, it's definitely having a
It's
moment.
like the hot new superfood or something. So we did some digging, got a whole stack of articles and research here ready to break it all down.
Some.
We'll be looking at the potential benefits, the nutritional side of things, and even how to actually use sea moss.
Sounds good.
So, by the end of this, you'll be a total sea moss pro.
That's the goal.
One thing that really jumped out at me just from skimming some of these articles is how sea moss is being marketed as like a cure-all for everything.
Oh yeah.
The Healthline article even mentions boosting your immune system, helping with weight loss, and even increasing fertility.
Wow, that's a lot to promise.
Right, like is it really a miracle food?
Well, that's what we're here to find out. But one thing that's interesting is that sea moss itself isn't actually new.
Oh, really?
It's been around for ages. It's scientifically known as Chondrus crispus, and it's a type of red algae. It grows in the cool waters of the Atlantic.
Interesting.
And it's been a traditional food source in places like Ireland for a long, long time. They've actually used it as a thickener in foods.
Huh. That makes me think of carrageen, which I see on food labels all the time.
What's
Is that
that?
related?
Yeah, carrageen is often derived from sea moss.
Wow, so it's already in a bunch of stuff we eat.
Exactly. But I think the key thing to keep in mind with all these health claims is that, we need to approach it with a critical eye.
Right.
There's a lot of hype out there, but the scientific research specifically on sea moss is still pretty limited.
So we can't just assume all the benefits of seaweed in general apply to sea moss.
Exactly. And a lot of the purported benefits are based on those broader seaweed studies, not studies on the specific type of algae.
Okay, so important distinction there.
Yeah.
We need to be careful about extrapolating those findings.
Definitely. It's like saying because apples are healthy, then all fruit must be equally healthy. Not quite the same thing.
Makes sense, but okay, so even if we're being cautious, it does sound like sea moss has some nutritional value.
For sure.
The articles mention it being a good source of iodine, along with some other minerals and antioxidants.
Right.
And it's also low in calories, fat, and sugar.
Yeah. Pretty good profile overall.
So maybe there is something to this whole sea moss craze after all.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet.
Fair enough, fair enough.
While it does have those nutrients, we need to remember that the amounts can vary a lot depending on where the sea moss is grown.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just like a standard uniform product.
Not necessarily. Factors like water temperature, pollution levels, even the time of year when it's harvested can all affect its composition.
So sourcing really matters.
Absolutely. And one thing we should probably talk about, especially with the iodine content, is that too much iodine can actually be harmful.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. Isn't iodine essential for thyroid function?
It is, but like many things, it's about balance.
So you could potentially overdo it with sea moss?
It's possible, and there's also the potential for heavy metal contamination, just like with any seafood.
Okay, so there are some things to be aware of for sure, but what about those potential benefits we were talking about earlier?
Yay.
Like, can sea moss really boost your immune system or help with digestion or even, boost fertility?
Well, let's take a closer look at those claims.
All right, so we talked about the iodine and the thyroid, but I'm really curious about some of the other potential benefits that get mentioned with sea moss.
Like what?
Well, things like boosting your immune system or improving digestion,
Yeah, those are popular ones.
and even some claims about sea moss and fertility. What's the real story there?
Right, right. Well, I think it's important to remember that a lot of these claims stem from traditional uses of sea moss, which is fascinating in its own right.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like people have been using this stuff for centuries, right?
Exactly. And sometimes those traditional uses can point us in the right direction for scientific inquiry, but we can't just assume that anecdotal evidence equals scientific proof.
Okay, so we need to separate the historical uses from what's actually been proven in a lab.
Exactly. So, for example, the claim that sea moss can aid fertility. That might be connected to the iodine content, which we know is important for thyroid function and hormone production.
Right, that makes sense.
But we need more research to confirm a direct link between sea moss and fertility specifically. It's not a guarantee.
So it's like a clue, but not a conclusion.
Exactly. And I think that same principle applies to a lot of the other purported benefits, like the idea that sea moss can boost your immune system.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
There are some studies suggesting that certain compounds found in some types of seaweed might have immune modulating properties.
Interesting. So there's a possible mechanism there.
Right. But again, we need to be careful about extrapolating from general seaweed studies to sea moss specifically. Just because one type of seaweed shows a certain effect doesn't mean all seaweed will do the same.
Right, right. It's like how all citrus fruits have vitamin C, but they're not all interchangeable.
Exactly. A grapefruit isn't the same as an orange.
So while the idea of sea moss boosting immunity is intriguing, we need more research specifically on Chondrus crispus to say anything for sure.
I agree. And that same cautious approach applies to other potential benefits as well, like the claim that sea moss can help regulate blood sugar levels.
Oh yeah, that's another one I've heard a lot about.
There's a theoretical basis for it. Some seaweed has fiber like alginates that can slow down glucose absorption.
Okay, so it's plausible.
Yeah. But again, we need more research specifically on sea moss to see if it has a significant impact. And of course, anyone with diabetes or blood sugar concerns should always consult their doctor before adding something new to their diet.
Definitely. Always better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another common claim. Sea moss as a digestive aid or prebiotic.
Oh yeah, the gut health connection.
People are really interested in that these days. And there is some evidence that certain types of seaweed contain prebiotic fibers.
Right, those fibers feed the good bacteria in our gut.
Exactly. But we need more evidence to say for sure whether sea moss specifically has a significant prebiotic effect. Most of the research so far has focused on other types of fiber.
So it's possible, but more research is needed.
Exactly. It all boils down to critical thinking. It's great to be curious about these potential benefits, but we also need to be discerning consumers.
Don't just believe everything you read.
Right. Look for credible sources, consider the evidence, and be wary of anything that sounds too good to be true.
And of course, talk to your doctor before making any major dietary changes,
Always good advice.
especially if you have any underlying health conditions or are taking medication.
Exactly. Now, speaking of things to be aware of, we briefly touched on the issue of heavy metal contamination earlier. Maybe we should dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to address. People are understandably concerned about heavy metals in their food, especially seafood.
Right. So how do we know if the sea moss we're buying is safe?
So we've talked about the potential benefits of sea moss and, the things to watch out for, like heavy metal contamination.
Right.
But now I think it's time for the big question.
Yeah.
Is sea moss really all it's cracked up to be? Is it a miracle food, or is it just another health fad?
I think, it's definitely having a moment.
Yeah.
And like with anything that gets popular really fast, there's always going to be some hype involved.
Right, of course.
But based on what we've discussed so far, I'd say sea moss is best viewed as a nutrient-rich food with some interesting possibilities.
Oh.
Not necessarily a magical cure-all.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's some promising early research, but we really need more solid scientific evidence to confirm a lot of those health claims you see out there.
Right, like some of those claims are pretty extraordinary.
Exactly. And you know what they say?
What's that?
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
That's true. So I guess it's not about dismissing sea moss entirely, but just being realistic about what it can and can't do.
Right. And also remembering that, science is always evolving.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What we know today might be different from what we know 5 or 10 years from now.
Definitely. So it's a process of ongoing discovery.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot more informed about sea moss after this deep dive.
Me too.
And hopefully our listeners are too.
I hope so.
So as we wrap up here, what would you say is the most important thing for people to remember about sea moss?
I'd say approach it with informed curiosity, Don't just buy into the hype or get swept up in all the claims. Do your research, look for credible sources. And if you're thinking about trying sea moss, talk to your doctor first, especially if you have any health conditions or are taking medications.
That's great advice. It's all about being an empowered health consumer,
Exactly.
making informed choices and taking charge of your own well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of sea moss. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new along the way.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, keep exploring and stay curious. We'll see you on our next deep dive.